everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, we are back once again with a very special guest, Carli Ville, who you guys maybe have seen on my channel before, and Carli is joining us to talk about something called Locktober, which is something that I don't have a ton of experience in, so I'm very excited to get into this subject. But for people that don't know who you are, Carli, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Of course, my love. Hello, everyone. I'm Carli DeVille. I'm a clinical sexologist and licensed psychotherapist. I also host a podcast, Naughtylicious, as well as have this book, Naughtylicious, a sex conversation game for daring couples only.
Let's get into talking about Locktober. So, what
Let's do it.
exactly is Locktober?
Well, Locktober is kind of like a celebration, a challenge, a way of life.
Mmm, way of
So,
life.
a way of life, it seems like people get ready for it all year. So, essentially, Locktober is a challenge where chastity play enthusiasts challenge themselves to lock themselves in chastity for the entire month of Locktober. Some
Mmm.
people have been kind of like training for this month for the whole year, and it's become like bigger and bigger every year. I remember
Mmm.
I first started hearing about it with some rumblings of Locktober, some like locks and chains.
Mm-hmm.
Back in like I think it was 2018, but I feel that
Mmm.
the first origin of it ever was back in 2017 on Tumblr. So ever
Oh.
since then, it's just been growing and growing and growing to where now it's almost like inescapable. You can't go on Twitter or social media, especially if you're in the kink community,
Yeah, oh
without
yeah.
hearing about Locktober. And a lot of people are like, well, what is that? And I love telling them, I'm like, oh yeah, well, a lot of people will just lock themselves in chastity for the whole month. And they're like, what?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was That's how I first got introduced to it, is definitely through Twitter. It's very popular
Yeah.
with pro dom Twitter and just with like anyone who's into chastity. Like suddenly October happens, it's like, no, it's not about Halloween movies, it's about chastity.
Right,
Which
right, right.
I think is so
And
great. But
some go
yeah.
overboard. So not overboard, but
Mm.
some will, even if they can get through October, they might do the whole like no nut November,
Yeah.
denial December, so they
Just
keep
keeps
going.
going.
Those They keep going. They're locked.
Mm. It's a
Locked
whole
and
holiday
loaded.
season. I love it. Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you about that because I thought maybe it might be connected to No Nut November and all of that becoming very popular online as well. And it sounds like maybe there might be some overlap and inspiration there.
Yeah, so I've always been I love anything that's like juxtaposed and like a little ironic and stuff like that. And
Mm.
chastity in particular is one of those. And with the people who are into chastity for sexual purposes, which sounds so
Mm.
weird. It sounds so bizarre. Being like, well, how is it sexual? But it is, and we'll get into it as we go along. But people in
Mm.
chastity, they do it for the purpose of like challenging themselves to one, stay locked or be submissive. Some people are trying to um like get rid of any masculinity, so they'll lock
Mm.
their penises up, or at that point it'll be quote unquote useless clitty, which I've always thought was
Oh
so
yeah.
hilarious. I love saying like I'm litty like a useless locked up clitty anytime it's October. But for those, that particular subset of chastity enthusiasts, that withholding the semen and just not playing with their penis and not masturbating is something that
Mm.
is very subservient and like feminizes them. And then
Mm.
we have a whole other side of the coin, like the no nut November, or maybe more popularly like no fap, where
Oh yeah.
individuals will not masturbate or like not ejaculate for a long time. It doesn't always necessarily have to be October or November. They just try to not masturbate as much as possible or orgasm as much as possible, and they feel that they're getting some sort of power. Sometimes they feel like they get more masculine, they get more
Mm.
attractive, which is kind of funny, right? Because on one hand, you have people that are doing it to be more feminine, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have some people that are saying it makes them more masculine. And it's like,
Mm.
well, which is it, right? It could be a little bit
Yeah.
of both.
Yeah, it can be a little. Yeah, like I definitely know people from what I've heard about people that are into chastity, a lot of them enjoy it because it's a challenge and it makes it that much more tantalizing that you can't have it. Like it increases the allure of sex or orgasm or release in general because
Right.
you don't have access to it anymore. And I guess maybe we should back up for a second here, maybe just like quickly define what chastity is in case anyone's like, I don't, what do you mean? Like you're talking about like
Right.
the, so Robin Hood Men in Tights where there's like a little, there's
Yeah.
like a chastity scene.
I
Like, so
love
what
that scene.
exactly is chastity? What's that all about?
Right. So chastity is essentially just abstaining from sex. People do it for multiple reasons. Some people will
Mm,
do it for religious reasons. Some people will do it for moral reasons, like we're talking
mm-hmm,
about today. Some people will do it for sexual reasons or to um, get some, learn to pleasure themselves in a way that doesn't involve the penis. And that's like a
mm-hmm,
really popular way, especially for in like sissification, which we did the whole video on,
mm-hmm,
like that
yeah.
challenge of you lock up your penis and now you have to find pleasure from other parts of your body or sometimes like your anus.
Mm-hmm.
That is so euphoric, and it's almost like a challenge within the challenge of
Mm.
the month of Locktober. But yeah, essentially chastity is just like abstaining from sex, but it gets a little complicated, as with anything in the BDSM and kink world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in particular with chastity players, there might be orgasms. There might be a lot of sexual activity, but it's just, it's not touching the penis is pretty much what makes a difference, right? Like if you happen to
Mm.
orgasm from anal penetration or from nipple play or just from being so turned on because your dominant is having you watch them masturbate while you can't, and you're just so excited your little
Mm.
penis just shoots all over the place. You're still having that sexual experience,
Mm.
but technically you're still participating in Locktober.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to ask too, I know a lot of people associate physical devices with
Yes.
chastity play, and I want to talk a little bit maybe about different devices that people use for chastity and also mental chastity, what that looks like, if that's possible at all.
Of course. So with chastity devices, you have, well, one, I guess talking a little bit about the history of chastity
Mm.
devices. So
Mm-hmm.
they have some that supposedly are like from the 16th century, and you will see a lot of like those
Mm.
iron, like chastity belts, like in Robin Hood Men in Tights, right? Where
Yeah.
supposedly the thing was where people would leave their wives locked up in chastity. So while they were gone off to war or whatever, no one else would able to touch their precious bride. Or
Mm-hmm.
for the protection of women when they were traveling, they would have the chastity devices so they wouldn't get like S8 or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. And but none of that seems to be true. The
Yeah.
first version of, or the first like illustration of a chastity belt comes from I think it was like a book of different inventions, but a lot of the inventions were kind of jokes. So the chastity, it's believed that
Oh.
the chastity belt was actually just made to be funny, made as a joke. And
Oh.
as time went on, like it was incorporated into paintings and stuff like that. And they would make some, but most of the ones that are in museums and stuff, they're all replicas. So none of them are actual chastity belts
Hmm.
that have been used. It's very likely that no one ever really used chastity. And one of the funny things is that if you look into the idea of chastity, of usually being someone for someone with a vulva, right, to protect that from penetration, it's almost like a
Mm-hmm.
whole different scenario now where the vast majority of people in chastity do have a penis. And it's, I mean, I could count on like one finger the amount of women that have been in chastity or have talked about being into it. There
Mm.
are chastity belts and stuff like that for women, but they're not as popular as like the chastity devices for men, which you can see like a cage. Sometimes like you'll see the kind of like a plastic cover. A pink
Yeah.
one is very popular, or
Mm-hmm.
the transparent ones. Some of them are made of silicone. So there's like a lot of different materials of chastity devices. And one thing that I do want to recommend for anyone who is just starting off, while we're talking about materials,
Mm.
is if this is your first time in chastity or just playing with chastity or getting the idea of it, one, make sure to really read up on it, really look into all the different size guides there are, because
Mm.
the most important thing is having the right fit. If you don't have the
Yes.
right fit, you're not going to have a good experience. You might injure yourself, so you don't want any of that.
Mm.
There is a lot of resources online with some great sizing guides. I love in particular, there's like this website, well, it's more of a store,
Mm.
lockthecock.com, I believe it's called. They have such great
Mm.
resources for how to pick the right size, and obviously, they have a whole shop, so
Yeah.
they have everything there. But it
Mm.
is really important to, one, make sure that the size fits, because you don't want it to slip off. And then
Yeah.
also, if you're starting off with a material like silicone or a plastic, those lightweight materials, because if you just start off with the metal, you're not going to be used to the heaviness of
Ah,
those
yeah.
types of devices. They will weigh you down and, make you feel uncomfortable. And you're doing this for pleasure. So,
Yeah.
look up the sizing. I would say first start off with something cheap, just to make sure that you have like the sizing correct. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you're like, okay, I think I like this, then move on to something that's like a little bit more fancy, a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
more juicy.
Yeah. So there is a great video that What's the Safeword did recently about
Mhm.
chastity devices and sizing, and I know they talked a lot about how it's really important to make sure each individual component is the correct size, and it's
Yes.
with anything with penises, it's very easy for like ego to get in the way and think you need a much bigger size than you really do.
Right.
And it's funny because even with chastity, you think that there'd be like at least some overlap with like small penis humiliation and like maybe wanting to shove it into the
Ye-
smallest device possible.
Right.
But that seems
Yeah.
to not generally be the case for at least what I've heard. So
Hmm.
definitely take your time with sizing, and I agree. Like with anything in kink, really, like maybe don't buy the $200 custom paddle before you know
Yeah.
if you like paddle. Like test out if you
Yeah.
like paddling or not first. It's okay to use the cheap stuff from Amazon as a trial run. It's fine.
Exactly. You gotta
Yeah.
learn somehow, right? And it's
Mhm.
like your little like training bra
Yeah, yeah,
for
exactly.
your
This
chastity. And then if you
mhm.
are into small penis humiliation, or like sissification and feminization, where you are trying to like make it smaller, there are some cages where, I mean, it's pretty much like just puts it all the way down. It's like flat, where
Yeah.
you even wonder like
Vacuum sealed.
how does it even fit in there, you know?
Interesting. Okay. And I wanted to share a little bit because you mentioned you can count on one finger the number of people with vulvas that have been in chastity.
Yeah.
I would actually be one of those people. It's not
Oh my
actually
God,
my
I love
kink. Yeah, it's
it.
actually my kink. I had a partner years ago now that they were one of the very few people, actually the only person I've ever met that is a man that was into the idea of like putting women in chastity, and it was very difficult. There's like usual, there's like some very expensive fancy German company
Yeah.
that will like make like molded
The
devices
Germans
to use
always make the
around
best
vulvas.
like
They really
kink
do.
stuff. Yeah.
Like if you're like I can't find it, look for a German website because it's probably
Yeah.
on probably one of those. But we went to a local leather maker and we actually had like a custom fit device made that was essentially, it looks sort of similar to what you would see from like the medieval drawings of a
Hmm.
chastity device. I guess the way I
Was
would
it leather
describe it,
or?
it was leather. I would describe it. It was sort of like a reverse strap on. Like imagine if instead of the strap
Okay.
on pointing out,
Yes.
it pointed up and in, like
That's
into
a
the. So it was
great way to
basically
describe it.
like it was basically the way it was designed wasn't like a metal shield protecting the whole area. It was like, oh well, you're just gonna be like plugged up with things inside your holes, and that's gonna be how
Right.
I control you with bondage. Like it was very bondage related. Like that was mostly the mental, at least from what I can remember, the
Yeah.
mental enjoyment of it was like the control and the secretiveness of it. Like you have this secret thing that like you're wearing that nobody else knows about. Like that
Yes.
was very alluring. And then also
Yes.
just that like subtle control where it's like I don't even have to touch you and I have control over this thing. And uh
Right. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, it is really like one of the most
Mhm.
ultimate like forms of submission that you
Mhm.
can, gift over to your worthy partner, right? You don't want to just give away that to just
Yeah.
anyone. You want to make sure that it's someone you trust and someone that
Mhm.
you can actually have fun with, and also make sure that you have a spare key just in case.
Oh yeah.
You
Oh yeah,
never know. You
definitely.
never know.
With everything, handcuffs, cock cages, whatever it is, have 5 keys. Put them everywhere. Put them in your car. Put them in your purse. Like just put them all
Exactly,
over.
exactly.
'Cause-
Right, right, right. And
Yeah.
not just like, have one for safety reasons, and then you
Yeah.
can have like another one just to play with, right? Like I know some people will
Mm.
like they will put the key in like a block of ice,
Oh yeah.
so they'll make like the submissive try to like work to get the key if they really want to be released from the cage. But a lot of the times people don't want to be released from the cage. Most of the
Yeah.
time that I work with people with, I do clinical sexology, so I work with couples that are trying to kind of explore their kinky side, and whenever they're trying to get into chastity, sometimes it's the letting them know like, okay, like you're going too much too soon, you want to take it
Ah.
slow, you want to make sure that everything is safe and that your body is slowly kind of getting used to it. And
Mm.
also I would recommend to everyone the like consider, I know especially in Locktober you might not want to do it, but consider releasing yourself at night, just because
Mm.
the penis needs that blood flow in an erection to stay healthy, right? And to make
Mm.
sure that everything works the way that it should work. So that's why when people have like those boners at night, like they're like,
Yeah,
well, what's
yeah.
this about? Yeah, it's just your body just kind of like pumping itself up, making sure that everything is still working. And yeah, and of course, washing every few days, you do want
Mm.
to remove the cage for that, but it is important to, at least for the nighttime, you can just like cage back up during the day, but most of the time people just are real like, oh, no, I want to just be like in chastity 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
and then they put a lot of pressure themselves, and then they feel bad when they don't complete that, right? So I'm always telling
Mm-hmm.
people, especially that are trying Locktober, it's like, it doesn't matter if you don't do the full 30 days, like you can still enjoy it, you can still participate in it, and if you like quote unquote failed, then just lock yourself back up the next day,
Yeah.
it's not,
How would you do like
it's
makeup days? Yeah.
exactly, you
Mm-hmm.
might need to make up some days in November,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, I think I find that chastity it is similar to a lot of other kinks where oftentimes it's a fantasy that's built up over a very long period of time where it's like it's been like somebody's core fantasy for maybe
Right.
years or decades before they really get to do it, and by that point their fantasy is like, whoa, like way over here, and it's like, I'm gonna be locked up for 5 years and I'm gonna be locked up forever,
Yeah.
and it's like, all right, that's really hot, and I'm glad that you have found something
Yeah.
that like you enjoy so much. It's okay if you're not immediately able to satisfy your like core fantasy experience the first time, because like
Exactly.
anything in BDSM is that way usually, right? Like the first time you
Right.
do a flogging or a spanking, it's not going to be the first time out. You're doing it exactly the way that you thought it would be
Right.
in your fantasy world. Like it takes time to be adjusted, and I imagine that wearing the device is oftentimes very different than how people imagine it will feel, from their fantasy experiences.
Exactly. And no one really
Mm.
thinks about all like the logistics, like
Yeah.
urination or like
Yeah.
cleaning it. Like no one really thinks about that.
Mm-hmm.
So and you're completely right. It is very different in the fantasy world than when it's reality.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I do want to give a heads up to people whose partner is into chastity and they're just trying it is, prepare to hear about it.
Oh yeah.
People in chastity, they love to talk about it. That's like one thing that I've heard
Mm.
like time and time again from the partner. It's like, okay, like yes, I get it. Like you're caged up. Like I'm done talking about it. But that's
Mm-hmm.
part of the fantasy, That's part
Mm-hmm.
of it, is just knowing that there's something on you that maybe not everyone knows about, like you mentioned earlier, right? Like you might
Mm-hmm.
be a little cage at the gym and just
Mm-hmm.
have like your little secret. So like you can have that and know that like your partner is already supporting you in one way,
Mm.
right? Like give them a little break
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to talking about it. And similarly, I think one really good thing for the partner for the partner of someone who's in chastity is that a lot of the time, now that they don't have the the penis to play with, or they start to pay more attention to the partner. They start like
Mm.
getting more physical with the partner. The focus starts shifting from their pleasure to their partner's pleasure, and that is one thing where a lot of the times the couples are, especially like cis females, they'll be like, I don't get
Mm.
it. What's in it for me? What's in it for me in chastity? It's like, well, lock them up and find out. Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot in it for you. A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
times, most in like heterosexual relationships, it's very penis based,
Oh, yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
chastity is a time where that penis is locked up, it's put away, and
Mm.
now you can make way to focus on your pleasure, have them pleasure you, since they can't get off, and that's a part
Mm.
of the little teasing and denial of like, you can be like, oh my god, like that feels so good if they're going down on you, like, oh, that feels so good, if only you weren't locked up in chastity, the things I would do to you, so you
Mm.
can get them all worked up and hot and bothered, and that's a lot of fun for a lot of people, having a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that power and then just being able to flirt with that can be a lot of fun. So there can be a lot that the other partner can benefit from. They just
Mm-hmm.
kind of got to play their cards right. And if you're tired of hearing about it, just let them know. Like, if you keep talking about being chastity, I'm going to get you out of there.
Ah, yeah, exactly. You got to give them the opposite. You're like, I'm going to take this away from you. Yeah, I think it's usually helpful, like, especially when you're exploring new kinks, and especially if it's like you're going to be doing something all day, like wearing a chastity device. Like, probably not always appropriate to be texting your partner about it when they're in their 10 a.m. meeting with their boss. Like, it's probably a good
Right.
idea. I would probably say I'd recommend having like contained space for like talking about it. Like, we can talk about
I
it
love
when we're
that.
home together, but don't text me about it at work. Like, we can talk together about it when we're in the car together, but not when we're in the shower in the morning or whatever. Like, there, you can set up boundaries, and I think it's important to have those boundaries when you're exploring a new kink, because it's a lot harder to reestablish boundaries after the fact as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
establishing them from the very beginning. So I think that can help. Because the last thing you want is when you're exploring a new kink is for your partner to be overwhelmed by it and reject it, not
Right.
because they don't like the kink, but because they're overwhelmed by you talking about it so much. Like, that's not the outcome anybody wants.
Exactly. And I mean, that might not
Mm-hmm.
be a problem with like, in a gay relationship. There always tend to, I've never really heard of that being a problem in those, just
Oh,
because,
sure.
the
Mm-hmm.
dynamic is very, very different. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you can establish like those time frames with your partner, just being like, like, I'm doing this for you now. Like, let's just not talk about it for a day. Let me get excited
Mm-hmm.
again, right? Because that's the one thing
Yeah.
is you have to remember is your partner has not spent the hours and hours and hours fantasizing about it or watching the type of
Mm.
like naughty content on it. They don't
Mm.
have that like fixation on chastity as much as you do, for the most part, right? Sometimes people find their perfect match and it's like, oh yeah, like we can talk about chastity all day, but
Mm.
that's not always the case. So just like you said, you don't want to do too much too soon where it kind of scares them away, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're doing a disservice to yourself by all of a sudden they're worried about like, oh, next October I don't want to do it because I'm so tired, I don't want to hear about it all the time, if
Yeah, they don't want to
you
dread it.
exactly you and then what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
So if it's
exactly.
something that you want, like,
Mm-hmm.
find something and build up, right? Like you said, it's hard to, once the boundaries is broken, some people can get really scared of it, right? Like, depending on the
Yeah.
boundary, if you break a boundary that maybe makes you in fear like your safety or something like that, it would be a lot harder to want to say, like, voluntarily be like, yeah, let's do this again. You're gonna be
Yeah.
a little bit more reserved. However, if you were
Mm.
trying things out and you're like, okay, well, this feels safe, like I can do this, I might be able to do a little bit more next time. So that's going to
Yeah.
be really, really helpful. And ultimately, you want to be an expert in your own kinks and fetishes. I know, like,
Mm.
one of the most common questions I get asked is like, how do I talk to my partner about this particular kink or fetish? It's like, well, first of
Yeah.
all, do you know everything about why it is that you're turned on by it? Because
Mm.
everyone might love to say like, kinks and fetishes are not like one panties fits all.
Mm.
Your version of chastity is going to be very different from the next person's version of chastity, and especially for a partner who is not into that, they're going to have an idea of it that might not be at all what you're looking for. So if you want
Mm.
to have that fantasy fulfilled, and let's say you're more of like the type that, part of the thing
Mm.
that you love about chastity is that you love giving over that part of your sexuality to another person, and being very submissive, and then
Mm.
doing whatever it is that they need from you, and you kind of get off to that. But if your partner sees chastity and they think like, oh, maybe they they're into like small penis humiliation, right? And then they start being
Mm-hmm.
all like, oh, look at that caged up little clitty. And if that's not what you're into, you're gonna be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my god, what?
Mm-hmm.
You're not gonna like it, you're not gonna have fun. So one, make sure that you know exactly what it is that you like about these particular kinks and fetishes, and become an expert so you're able to explain it to the person. You know, what I really find so sexy about chastity is, you know, handing over to that key to you and knowing that you're going to decide when I have pleasure or not. That really turns me on, right? Or on
Mm.
the other hand, being like, I love to put my penis in a cage and I love to be humiliated for it. Then
Mm.
okay, all right,
Yeah.
we can do a little small penis humiliation then. So the biggest mistake you can do is just saying like, "Hey, I want to do chastity, and let's just jump right into it." You know, like
Yeah.
explain to your partner what it is that you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for. It's just like any other like scene, right? Like where sometimes like those really special fantasies that you have, you want to almost like script it out or have like an
Mm.
outline of how you want it to go, just because you have that idea in your head and you really want to bring that to life. So you can kind of
Yeah.
have that when it comes to the discussions about chastity. And if you let your partner know what it is that you find exciting, they get to one, process that and understand you
Mm.
on a different level, and that like opening up to that and having someone like hear that from their partner, it creates a bond. You know, like a
Yeah.
lot of the times with like dominatrixes, that where they talk about how a lot of the times like the husbands are, you know, are going to them because the wives or their partner, you know, they could never tell them about this particular kink or fetish, or they're
Mm.
worried that they're going to judge them and stuff like that. But ultimately, a lot of them just wish I could have this with my partner. I wish I wasn't safe, you know, enough to share this,
Mm.
because it is very bonding. Like anytime that you have like your deepest sexual desires like shared with someone, you bond with them. And if it's
Mm-hmm.
something that someone that you're in a relationship with, I mean, that's talk about like some security. You're gonna have that
Yeah.
relationship under lock and key, literally.
Ah. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, vulnerability is so powerful in kink, and even with like vanilla sexuality, it doesn't even have to be kinky. If it's just like I'm really into like pegging or this specific type of oral or whatever, like even saying that can be something that people don't have experience doing because we're not really taught to do that. So, absolutely agree with that.
Especially
Yeah.
if it threatens their idea of who they are in the relationship,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
So like if let's say you're into chastity and you want to tell your partner like, hey, I want you to put me under lock and key, and they start thinking, okay, well, does that automatically mean that I'm going to be the more like dominant like alpha
Mm.
person in this relationship? Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't want that. I want to feel like a little dainty submissive person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, knowing that, and going back to knowing what it is that you find pleasurable and being able to communicate that with your partner, you'll be able to be like, it's not necessarily about changing our relationship dynamic. Our
Mm-hmm.
relationship is a relationship. It is for a reason. It works for a
Mm-hmm.
reason. I like this. This is just a bedroom thing, or this is just like a
Mm.
fantasy thing if you're only talking about it, but it's not necessarily like something that you want. I mean, unless you're a lifestyler, right? But that's a whole
Yeah.
different that's a whole different topic. At that point, your partner, I'm sure your partner knows about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, sometimes people aren't as sneaky as they think they are
Right.
with
Yeah,
their
they can't
kinks.
hide it. They can't hide their
Hmm.
huge collection of cages, you know.
Yeah. Always seems to be ordering a lot of women's lingerie, but never buying it
Right.
and never giving it to me as a present.
I
What's going
never
on
get
there?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, not my size either. So strange. No, yeah, I think it's something where I think with introducing kinks, and maybe this is sort of a function of the way that a lot of people tend to introduce them, which is like this grave confession that's gonna alter the whole relationship. It makes it sound like, now we're gonna go from being this egalitarian, vanilla, maybe even like man led relationship for a heterosexual couple into now being, oh, well, now I have to be the dominatrix and you're going to be my slave? Like, what? Like,
No.
people think it's going to be this extreme overnight change to the whole relationship. But yeah, it really can just be a bedroom only thing, or like maybe it can eventually progress into a lifestyle thing if you decide you want to take it in that direction. But it's not like given it's going to alter the whole relationship on like a basic level. And I would even argue, I'd imagine there's ways to play with chastity that are more putting the person who's in chastity in like a more traditional like masculine headspace. Like I was kind of thinking of like the caged beast, you know, like it's like
Mm-hmm.
your big, scary, powerful thing that has to be contained, and like the tiny
Mm-hmm.
little Red Riding Hood character has to like keep you under lock and key to prevent you from like escaping and
With this big
terrorizing the
burst of
neighborhood.
semen, you know.
Yeah. So like these even ways to kind of play on it that's kind of beyond the traditional framework if that ends up being more comfortable or like
I
that's maybe
love
your
that.
particular fantasy. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is so true. I like always find a way that's gonna work for your relationship. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like if uh, if they're not fully on board, if they're worried about it, like, well, well, one, find out like what are they reluctant about? You know, what is it
Mm.
that's what's the barrier? Because the same way that you are learning about yourself enough to talk to your partner about it, you want to find out like, well, what is it that you're concerned with, right? And then that at that point, maybe they might say like, I'm worried that it's going to change the dynamic, or I'm worried that
Mm.
you're just never going to want to have sex with me, or whatever it is. You're just not going to know until you kind of dig in a little deeper and ask them like, okay, what is it about this that turns you off, right? And
Yeah.
what about this could turn you on? What aspects
Mm.
about this can you play with or flirt with?
Mm.
And you can start there, you know, like that'll be a baby step, because if they just say
Mm.
no, then you're just like, oh no, like, you know, you go crying into your little collection of cages.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't move you forward. But if
Mm.
you kind of be like, okay, I know you don't want to, but it's something that I'm really, really interested in. It's something that really, really excites me. It's something that I want to explore. And
Mm.
I want to do this with you. Is there anything about it that might turn you on? Is there anything about it that you might be like, okay, I can do this, right? And just
Mm.
having that one step to where like a compromise. And then again, what's in it for them, right? Like you have
Yeah.
to present like, if you do this for me, like I will, I don't know, take the trash out for a whole month.
Yeah, I'll take some chore off of your load. I'll do something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
something else I wanted to ask about is myths and misconceptions about chastity because I've heard like all different things, right? Like if you do it for too long, your penis is going to fall off or like it can
Yeah,
make you smaller over time
it
or like
can.
all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of things like that. So maybe let's talk about some things that maybe are misconceptions or myths that are actually myths and maybe things that are maybe actually a little bit true that maybe are good things to consider like maybe like can chastity like actually shrink your erect penis size over time, like what's that about?
Right. So I guess the biggest myth would be one that it existed for you know, those
Oh sure, yeah.
medieval purposes. I would say that would be the
Mm-hmm.
biggest myth, was that it actually happened, and that those belts that you see on like in museums and stuff like that are the real thing. But when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to the health aspects, that's where it gets a lot more difficult now. I mean, I feel like maybe in 10, 20 years we will have a lot more information, but
Mm.
it's something that is relatively new in terms of like, it's weird saying it mainstream, but it is a lot more mainstream now,
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. So you don't really have that information, because a lot of people don't go and tell their doctors like, hey, I'm locked up in chastity. You know, like,
Yeah, it's not a
tell me, is
typical
this okay?
conversation. Yeah.
Exactly. But not, you know, there hasn't been any like recorded um like disaster that happens
Mm.
from being locked up. However, people do report that their erection will get smaller. And again, that's one of those things where that might be something that you're into, that might be something that you are not into, because some people do get
Mm.
really excited by the fact of like, oh my god, I'm getting smaller, smaller, smaller. But you know, I would say
Mm.
just be really, really aware of the reality of the situation of like, okay, yes, in right now this is really sexy, this is really hot, this is like really turning me on. But
Mm.
in like 5, 10 years, if I lose, let's say like if my penis gets any smaller, or if like, you know, I don't have
Mm.
the strong erections that I had before, because I'm not giving, you know, like that use it or lose it, right? I'm not giving
Mm.
that erectile tissue that room to breathe and to grow and to thrive and all that.
Mm-hmm.
um if you're okay with that, then I guess, you know, go for it. You know, just make
Mm.
sure that you're very informed on that and know the risk of doing that. But if you say like, okay, I don't know if I want to take that risk, then you can do things that are going to make sure that you do it a little bit more safer, right? Like letting it out at night, or just making sure that you
Mm-hmm.
do have like some healthy erections every now and then is going to be really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing would be like that everyone in chastity just is gay, or that they want to
Oh.
be
Mm-hmm.
that they want to have a vagina. That is definitely, both of those things aren't true. Huge,
Mm-hmm.
huge myths. Like you mentioned, some people will lock their penis in chastity because of the the perceived benefits that they feel that they get from it, right? Like they feel like they
Yeah.
get more masculine, and like that retaining
Mm-hmm.
that semen is makes them more
Mm-hmm.
powerful. I know some people swear that they almost kind of like get magical powers from it. And if you think
Yeah.
about it, it makes sense because we've had a long fascination with semen. I actually just did like a podcast on semen fetishes. And
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you just go back throughout history, there's been like such an obsession with it, and it makes sense, right? It's like it's linked with pleasure, it's linked with life, and people would
Mm-hmm.
drink it for their powers, or some people would not want to release it because they think that holding on to it will make them more quote unquote masculine, right? Like keeping
Mm-hmm.
all that like semen to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like let it out, give me a little bit.
Yeah, I
But
know
yeah, so
it's
not everyone
yeah.
is doing it for that like more like sissification
Mm-hmm.
route, which there are a lot of people. I mean, that is one of the hugest things in sissification, is like just
Mm-hmm.
locking up that clitty, because you don't need that penis, right? Like you need to
Mm-hmm.
find pleasure by having like a real alpha man actually like bang you. That is
Mm-hmm.
where you will derive pleasure from. So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
tricky because there's truth to everything, right? Like because
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be at some point one person that are like, well, this applies to me, and then 10 people that are like, well, this doesn't apply to me, and then there's going to be 10
Mm-hmm.
people that are like, oh no, but this does. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think really when it comes to chastity, I think the most important thing, like as far as like myths and stuff go, I think a lot of people will probably, like we talked about earlier, like just try to go completely all out and be like, I like the way chastity works is I should just be able to have this on my penis 24/7, starting today forever, and like usually you got to work up to that. And I know, like you said, like there's not any urology journal I know of is like
right, yeah,
currently
yeah.
conducting studies on like the long-term effects of chastity, but I would love to know that data because I think it is
Same.
really important, because how much of it is like wearing the wrong size of device, or maybe it's temporary and like when you stop it for 6 months like your full length comes back, like who knows
Right,
like what those effects really truly are. But I think it is worth being cautious about for sure, just
right.
on the off chance it does really matter to you, or maybe you like it, like you said, right? Like maybe some people are just into
Yeah,
like getting actually smaller and smaller and smaller, but
smaller and smaller, yeah,
mm-hmm.
and then being
So
humiliated for it.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Like, like it's even worse than last time.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So getting into doing chastity without a partner a little bit. Like, if you don't have a partner
Yes.
currently, but you would love to explore chastity play, how do you recommend doing that?
Chastity is like one of those things where it is so perfect to do on your own,
Mm.
just because. And I actually recommend people to start off on their own, not starting
Mm.
off with their partner, because then you kind of have like the expectations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What I would say, chastity and anal are probably two things
Oh,
that
yeah.
you should always start on your own, just to know how your
Mhm.
body is going to react to things, to know what it feels like. If you don't like it, you can find out then and there, instead of like doing this whole thing, so just starting off with yourself, and one, getting excited for the process, because you're finally living out your fantasy, you're finally ordering your first chastity device, even if you don't
Mhm.
have anyone else to do it with, you can still have fun with it on your own. And part of that
Mhm.
process of learning and like the sizing and ordering that's going to be really exciting. One thing I do want let people to know is that first time you might have a really difficult time putting it on. Like it's not uncommon for that first time that someone's gonna be locked up in chastity to like have this huge throbbing hard on that won't quit,
Mm.
just because they're so excited over like, oh, I'm finally gonna be locked up in
Yeah.
chastity, and who knows when I'll be uncaged and be able to like
Mhm.
stroke myself to orgasm again. So be patient with yourself, if at
Mm.
first like like it's too hard, like, rub one out. And
Mhm.
once you're soft, you can kind of attempt again. But then learning, doing it, wearing it around the house for like 30 minutes. How does it feel? Like, how do you feel
Mhm.
with it? What is it like mentally that's turning you on about it? Physically, what are you feeling? Is there any sort of pain? Is there anything like itchiness? Is there any uncomfort? And then kind of like gradually going, maybe the next day you do 1 hour, right? And then for
Mhm.
like a whole week you do just 1 hour, just so your body can get used to it. You will still have the excitement. You can put it on, go to the gym, have that little secret, go
Mhm.
to like a board meeting.
Ah.
Little does anyone know I'm locked up in chastity.
Mhm.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. So there's so many things that you can do just by yourself, and really, like, you you don't need anyone else to not
Mhm.
masturbate. I mean, it will be easier if once you've developed that some
Mhm.
form of discipline, like, to where you're like, okay, I can do this. Or even if you haven't fully developed, like, okay, I can do this for 2 hours. But if you think, okay, this is something that I'm comfortable with, then you can move it on to the next level. But you really don't need to a partner with it. There's so many things that you can do with yourself,
Mhm.
right? A lot of the times people are in chastity because they want to learn to pleasure themselves in other ways that don't involve the penis, like in sissification with the sissygasm, right? Like, where they want to learn
Mm.
how to orgasm from anal penetration alone. It's a lot harder to do if you have something just calling for your attention, right?
Yeah.
But if that's locked up, then challenge yourself to really find that pleasure through the penetration or through the nipple sensations. Or sometimes, like, you can find out, put a little, like, a Hitachi wand on it, and how do the vibrations
Mm.
feel? Like, you can also orgasm in your chastity cage through various different ways. And really,
Mm.
honestly, everyone with a lot of dedication, everyone can find different ways of orgasming than they normally do. I always encourage
Mm.
it to people, because if
Mhm.
you're constantly, especially with masturbation, right? I've had a lot of people that get so literally stuck with that grip, that, like,
Oh,
grip that
sure.
they
Yeah.
have on their
Mhm.
penis. They're so used to having the mental, the physical, the visual of the way that they orgasm and the way that they masturbate, that they're unable to orgasm from any other way. They might not even be able to orgasm
Mm.
from sex. They might not be able to orgasm from blowjobs or even some hand jobs, because they're so used to that one way. So challenging
Mhm.
yourself to orgasm in different ways is going to be really helpful for you, and it's
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, I get to
It's fun.
experiment, explore your body. Like, it might even be better than what you were doing before. And I have to imagine as well that if you are doing this solo, like these days with the internet, there's all kinds of, I'm sure, recorded videos and
Yeah.
ASMR and like jerk off instruction related stuff that
Oh
like is
yeah, yeah,
connected to
yeah.
chastity. Like
Yeah.
you can find
Look at
ways to
you locked
simulate
up
it.
in that
Yeah.
little cage.
Yeah, like all there's kinds of ways to simulate. Like if you want that feedback to help you like push forward into the next day of also being in chastity again, like you can find that. Or like I almost like the idea of like keeping a journal of it, like keeping a diary to yourself of like today I did 30 minutes. This is how I felt, and kind of just like tracking it and see
Yeah.
mentally and like physically what you feel. And also if you are doing it solo and you're keeping it on for a longer period of time, I remember not really relate to this exactly, but I used a tracking app for a long period of time. It was like a habit tracker app.
Hmm.
And you could see other people who used the app, like kind of what the most common tracking things were. And the most common thing was nofap. That was like for some reason, this is like a normal, like non kink related,
That's funny.
like,
Yeah.
1 million review, like habit tracking app. And so many people were like tracking their porn and masturbation habits on the app. So, like, hey, like you can always download an app and be like, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4 days in a row, I've been in chastity for at least 30 minutes, and like, have some way to have accountability to yourself if that's like part of the motivation there, because you're definitely not alone in doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's very
lots of
common.
groups, lots of
Mm-hmm.
online support groups for it, like with the NoFap. Obviously, that's a whole different,
Yeah.
that's a different side of the coin. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of support, and also, like, you can find people who will be your virtual key holder. There's
Oh,
a
sure,
lot of
yeah.
people that would be very excited to be your virtual key holder. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
even need to specifically find someone where you live. If like maybe you're worried about like other people finding out, or maybe you live in a
Mm-hmm.
rural area, you can still have that dynamic of like a key holder and like submissive in chastity with just finding someone online. You can always find that too, like
Yeah,
FetLife,
absolutely.
different groups,
Mm-hmm.
different like conventions to just meet people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I know there's lots of femdoms on Twitter this time of year where like they're like, oh, if you send me this, like I'll send you like 30 days of like instructions for like Locktober, and like you get something every day in your inbox or like OnlyFans or whatever, and then you get an opportunity to have a little human connection while you're doing it, and like
Yeah,
a fun challenge to try and meet, which I think is another good way of doing it, and I love that idea. Just kind of
I love
like
that too.
anything in terms of like kind of gamifying it. I feel like this makes it so much more fun versus like
Hmm.
aimlessly trying to be like, I'm not supposed to take this off, but what else am I supposed to do? Like having something that builds structure around it, I think can make it much more enjoyable.
Right.
Mm.
Because a lot of the times, like with the D for discipline is
Oh yeah.
so big. Like
Mm-hmm.
people just crave discipline. Like we
Mm-hmm.
just love it, whether that's like being disciplined or like, testing out limits and boundaries of other people. Like there's just something
Mm.
about discipline, and being able to like find that with someone, even if it's virtually, is going to be good. And, like
Mm.
enjoying the little challenges. Like right now, everyone is locked up in chastity. You could easily just
Ah.
like read through Twitter and kind of get the support that you need. There's this one
Mm-hmm.
dominatrix, Chastity Queen. Like, oh, I love
Mm.
her. I love having her on the podcast. You can find her on Twitter at like Queen_of_lockup. And
Mm.
I mean, Chastity Queen, her big thing is chastity. So she's always putting on like little challenges and stuff. She also does some great small penis humiliation.
Mm.
She is so funny. I remember I had interviewed her for an episode on small penis humiliation,
Mm-hmm.
and that like the wit that she has is amazing. And for a while, like I kept being tagged in a whole bunch of like little
Ah.
penises, and then she would always be saying the funniest things that I just want to like everything, and I'm like, oh my god, if someone
Mm-hmm.
goes onto my Twitter, it's just gonna be like liking a whole bunch of small penises.
Oh my god, yeah. Well, it's good. I love that the internet allows people to, because, like, I mean, 40 years ago, we would have had a very difficult time finding somebody that, like, just out in the open to be like, I'm willing to engage in this kink. And it's so nice that we have that opportunity now for people that maybe don't live somewhere where they can be open with, finding partners through, like, a dating app or something that are into chastity. But also,
Exactly.
like
And
even
the information out
yeah.
there,
Mm-hmm.
like you're like a trailblazer when it comes to putting that
Mm-hmm.
information out there for people, right? Because it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that a lot of people were talking about, or
Mm-hmm.
everyone wanted that information, everyone's looking for that information, and to be able to provide like that knowledge for
Mm-hmm.
people actually interested in, from someone who knows and has experienced that, and you feel, one, that you're not alone, and two, you get some legitimate education out of it. So
Mm-hmm.
kudos to you. I love you.
Oh, thank you, Carli, and thank you so much. Like I with your work as well. Like I think it's always great when we have like actual professionals in the space that lend their opinions and perspectives. And we just there's so many different little facets of kink
Yeah.
and BDSM and sexuality that it's like I don't know everything about everything, and I'm so glad you could be on to share your wisdom and knowledge about chastity and Locktober, because I get so many questions about it, especially
Yeah.
this time of year, and I'm like, I don't know a whole lot about this. Let's
Right.
talk to somebody who does.
Thank
So,
you. And I love
yeah.
that. And that is so true, right? It's like
Mhm.
the whole community just learning from each other, because you're not everyone's going to know everything, right? And like in
Mhm.
my particular line of work, I'm usually the most vanilla person in the room.
Ah,
So,
yeah.
and there's only so much that I can literally learn just from like
Mhm.
reading and like working with people, but also like talking with professionals and like people
Mm.
into that, like they provide a different perspective. And it's just finding out what is it that we can learn from each
Mm.
other. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I
Exactly.
love that.
Well, for people who want to find more about you, where can they find you, Carly?
They can find me everywhere at Carli DeVille. On the Naughty Licious Sex podcast is pretty much like my home. That's where you
Mhm.
will really see like or hear everything raw and uncensored. But yeah, you can go to my website, carlideville.com. You can check out my book, Naughtylicious. It's a game. It's actually perfect for people who are just trying to figure out what kinks that they're into and what kinks they're not. It's kind of like a mix of yes, no, maybe list and for couples, as well as like a conversation game. So you just kind of flip through the book, you get to learn about a particular kink or fetish, and then you don't even have to be the one that says like, hey, are you into diaper play, right? Like the question is in there, and you get to really have some time with your partner where you're not worried about opening up about like your deep dark secrets, but you know, you can just pick it up, find out how they feel about it, and learning about things that, okay, that seems kind of interesting, maybe we can do that. It's always so good.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I know. I like just to give people a sense of it all. Like I have like one of my pages open here. Like there's lots of questions in here, and like there's so many. There's like this is like 200 pages or something. I think.
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of
200,
questions.
it's like almost 200, I think. And there's just so much stuff in here. If you wanted a good way to be like, how do I talk to my partner about this kink? Oh, I'm gonna serendipitously open up to the page about anal and glory holes.
Yeah, glory
yeah.
holes, right? Or situations, right? Like I think some people are afraid of like even finding out, would you be okay if I went to a strip club? You know,
oh sure,
would you want to go to a strip club with me? And there's a question for that too.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much, Carli. And links to everything I can link to will either be down below in the description box or it'll be in a pinned comment. YouTube is very dicey about what links it likes these days, but it'll be somewhere.
Lately. Taking away all our links.
Gosh, it's bad. We'll find a way to get through it. And again, thank you all so much for watching this video. Thank you, Carli, so much for being here. If you guys have any questions, you can either leave them down below or head over to Carli's work and see if any of your questions have been answered there. And if you want to see more of these, please do subscribe, and I'll talk to you all again very soon. Bye!